Go for it, Kev. Teach us.
Okay. I'm going to stand. The light's actually better here, funny enough. Better late, as I say, better late than never. Okay, so continuing with the theme of Shmita, and we actually we've got like 1 or 2 pages left, and we'll resume what we did before this. So this is for a first time for all the Cholim of Israel.
Amen.
Okay, so the next point we're going to discuss is okay, there we go. Okay. It says here, when you go to a store, this applies to Israel, you need to make sure that the store has a current to that custom, not a fraudulent one or fake one, one that was printed at Oriental Plaza and then faxed to, or sent via DHL to Joburg. Okay. I mean, from Joburg to Bnei Brak, anyway. May I eat in another's home if they have a different Shemitah practice from my own? So it says, Rabbi Yosef Rimon writes that one may eat in another's home during Shemitah, even if the guest does not eat it, the Heta Bechira produce, while the host does. And even if the guest does not buy Gentile produce, while the host buys only Gentile produce, the host should be careful to explain his practices to the guest. In any event, it is necessary to kasher the host's utensils. The overriding principle is to promote friendship between Jews. That's an important thing we should know. And not go overboard with chumrot and being judgmental, and that's another issue which we need to be very cognizant of. And, okay, next section is what is biyur? B-I-Y-U-R. Fruits which have kedushas feeds and are seasonal may only be eaten as long as that fruit is still found in the field. After it no longer exists in the field, we are not allowed to have it in our possession more than the amount needed for 3 meals for our family. Fruit in excess of this amount, usually not a domestic problem, must be taken outside and made hefker, ownerless. This may be done in 2 ways. 1, declaring in front of 3 people, fellow Jews, whoever wishes to take this fruit and eat may do so. And or 2, by taking the fruit to a public place and leaving it there for a short time. After the fruit becomes hefker, one may take it back into his possession and keep it in his home. It still retains kedushas shvit and must be treated accordingly. A particular concern is the otzer beitin, wine and grape juice for Pesach, which has a biyur date of Pesach. If such wine has kedushas shvit, then when one may well have more in his home than is permitted. As such, he must be sure to follow the above instructions for biyur. The dates for biyur for various fruits, according to the chief rabbinate of Israel, can be found in the accompanying chart. Vegetables generally do not require biyur, except the exceptions are beans, artichokes, sweet potatoes, pumpkin, garlic, peas, and strawberries. Their biyur dates are listed with the fruits. So just one thing here. There's a chart here. I don't know if you can see there. It says here, there's date, a certain fruit becomes shvit, and there's a biyur date. So let's just give one example. Pomegranates, which is one of the species, and one of the fruits you have to do bracha brona on. It says the pomegranates becomes shvit on the 14th of Tammuz 5782. And it says the biyur date is the 1st of Adar 5783, which is next to your Purim. And they all got different dates, which is very odd. It's mango becomes sweet on the 14th.
Kevin, I'm a little bit lost at what you're trying to teach. Maybe I'm missing it. Are you, Kevin, are you following? Also, are you following? I'm not being disrespectful. I really respect you doing.
They become.
Just hang on, Kev. Hang on a sec. Gavin, to you and Arthur, can you explain it to me?
No idea. I'm not really following that much.
I'm not following at all, Kev. We are not being
exercise then, Damon.
What?
It hasn't been a fruitless exercise.
No. We get rewarded Shemaim.
No, so what it's basically saying, a certain fruit only becomes Shemitah. It's from a certain date. You have to follow the Shemitah rules for it. And it's a weird thing that different fruits, because depends when they come in season. So they don't always follow. They don't always start in Rosh Hashanah. Certainly start in Adar next year.
Okay, you're saying
that's what it is.
Oh, okay, now I've got a bit of a clue. All right, that's easier. Sorry, guys, I have to ask.
All technical, and we actually have one little paragraph left. Shall I just finish it off?
Yeah, I finished the book.
Finished.
It was fun.
The date for biur on a particular fruit has passed, but I still have a large amount. What should I do? This fruit, well, it means fruit that you had in possession before it became Shemitah, before it was subject to Shemitah. This fruit, if it has Kedushas Shvit, would be permanently prohibited. It should be burned or buried. It may be given as a gift to others, and the recipient should declare it hefker. One should always check the biur notice, usually found in kosher stores, to see if the date has passed for a particular fruit. If so, then all such fruit in the store must have a proper hash. And the last point of this whole subject, what is sfichin? S-F-I-C-H-I-N. Rabbis prohibit eating vegetables which grew during Shemitah in Jewish fields, even if they grew by themselves. And that's called sfichin. This applies to grains or legumes which reached 1/3 of their growth in the Shemitah year, to vegetables which started to grow during Shemitah. Fruit which grew in a field in violation of Shemitah laws, shamur or ne'evad, is the subject of dispute. Minhag Yem Shalayim forbids its consumption. Minhag Chazon Ish allows it. Down there, it's, some of these get very technical, and some people take things to the Qumrah level. And, I go to a supermarket if they got it to the kashrut and the Shemitah certificate, then I'm buying the stuff. That's what I hold on.
I hear you.
That's what really, yeah.
But if you want to be strict, some people don't help us in the supermarkets. Some people think they're not kosher enough. Depends how.
There's certain people that might not eat a cow because it ate wheat during Pesach. And they slaughtered it. I'm kidding.
No, don't joke. There would be. Some people won't even eat in their own homes because they're not kosher enough for themselves. Okay.
Okay, so let's. I think, as the great Lubavitcher Rabbi once said, chametz is not dust. When people do spring cleaning, just like.
I just want to add a comment with Rabbi. He's right. He's got all these proofs that prove the existence of Hashem. But one of his best ones, which I really love, he said, no guy in his right mind will go up Mount Sinai and come down with all these halachas that are so intense. People want to run away from them. Look at these halachas. Look how detailed this is. No religion. They make it simple so people, because it's a money scam, the others are scams. So that it's a money-making operation. So you go in there and they just talk airy-fairy stuff to you and ideological stuff, and that's it, This, you can see the substance of this.
Yeah, it's true. It's a good point. Okay,
I'm actually hectically tired, so my mind's not. Even when I was reading, I wasn't pronouncing some of the words properly. So you'd have to forgive me.
All right. So listen, we've used 21 minutes productively on learning halachas. I'm happy. It's 21 minutes for halachas. It's important. Halachas are never a waste. They're absolutely good, and it benefits our soul. All right, let's get started. I'm going to do a quick summary of yesterday. We're on 53b2. The Gemara turns to cases in which three parties collaborate in doing damage, and the outlines the different areas of liability for each category of damager. Rava said, just remember that Rava holds like Rav Nassan, if an ox, a person, together push either a person or an animal or a utensil into a pit, the following laws apply. So where the three damages, we know that the pit is also considered the damager, because if somebody never dug a hole in there, there's nothing to fall into. Okay? And regarding actual damages to the person or animal, all of them, the person, the ox, and the pit are liable. Okay, that is actually nezek shalom. It's the actual damages at which is calculated and split between the three of them. If one of the parties can't pay for whatever reason, that there's no money, the other two have to pick up the shortfall, just so you know. He holds like Rav Nassan. Regarding the payments of the additional 4 things when the victim is a person and is injured, and the value of the offspring when it is a woman and she miscarries, the person who pushed is liable, whereas the ox that pushed and the pit are exempt. Okay? So that is if there's injury, guys, and the value of the offspring. Okay? That doesn't carry the death penalty unless the woman dies, as far as the value of the offspring is concerned. Now, regarding the payment of kofer for the death of a free man and 30 shekalim for the death of a Canaanite slave, that kofer payment only belongs to the owner of the ox, because it's a muad ox, and by rights a kofer ox means a kofer payment, in most opinions, is for a muad ox, meaning this ox was very dangerous, and you were warned that you hold somebody's life as your responsibility, because you should never have let a muad ox continue to live. You should have sold it, you should have put it down and got financial restitution from it before it got to this sort of dangerous state. So therefore you're liable in Shemaim, and you should pay with your own life. But the kofer payment means that you pay to the extent that it could break you financially. So do we pay according to what the life of the damage of the owner of the ox is worth, or the victim? That we've discussed in the previous Gemara. But the bottom line is kofer is only for the ox. The person and the pit are exempt. Well, why is the person exempt? Because he's getting the death penalty. Okay, if there was no warning, so before we discuss the warning side of it, you've got kimle b'di rabbi minay, which basically means you can't serve concurrent sentencing on one act. Meaning, if there's a death penalty, a person is liable for killing his fellow. In that particular case, the monetary compensation is waived, because we can only give the stronger of the two penalties. Same as if a person is eligible for 2 death penalties, we give them the more stringent, and that covers both. Now, if you say, but what happens if there were not witnesses or warnings, etc.? Because the penalty could carry death. It's that reason that the financial obligation is waived. There are no opinions that say, I'm sure, that the financial penalty is not waived unless the person actually dies. But the other opinions are, if we don't kill the person, how come they get off the monetary payment? Because that crime is sentenciable by the death penalty under the right conditions. Okay? Just doing a second or so summary. Why is the pit exempt? Well, the reality is we learn that if a person falls in the pit, there's exemption for death, but not for injury. So the owner of the pit isn't eligible for death. Gavin said a brilliant thing yesterday. He said you could come around and say that perhaps that we actually needed this particular part of the Gemara to teach us this. Based on what Gavin said yesterday, you might have come to the conclusion that the person might have been, so the owner of the pit might have been liable. Why? Because when we take a case of we learned for the first time in this Mishnah that if you had a mature, intelligent, functional animal, when we say intelligent, we don't know if it can do calculus, but we know it isn't retarded compared to other oxen. It's not brain damage. So average intelligence, mature enough to know and navigate its way around the pit. In that particular case, it's exempt, and only a immature, dysfunctional animal is you're obligated for. It's the first time we learned it in this Mishnah. But if the thing of it is that a functional animal is pushed in by somebody else's ox, both the owner of that ox that attacked it as well as the pit are liable, because in that case it didn't matter if the animal was functional. it meant that the animal fell in and died. So it couldn't have done anything to use its intelligence to be an exemption. And the owner of the pit then is responsible, because had there been no pit, the animal wouldn't have died. So Gavin then asked along the same thing, then maybe the pit in this case is responsible for the person's death, not in a normal case, because he was pushed into the pit. And had there been no pit, there would be no liability, which I thought was a great point. And that's exactly why this Gemara mentions that there's an exemption for the owner of the pit in this case. For some reason, a person is exempt completely in all, the owner of the pit is exempt in all cases where the is death of a person. And the reason being that I can see, Gavin, is that the one is mentioned in the verse itself. And
that's what I was going to say today, that it's actually in the verse, and that's why you can't deviate from the actual verse.
Absolutely, and you can't deviate from the verse, whereas the other is an opinion of one of the Tanaim in the Mishnah, if that makes sense. So, you've got Exodus 21, chapter 21, verse 34. So the thing of it is, if there's a verse that testifies to it, you cannot argue with the verse. Okay. So anyway, I think that's a good point. So let's just carry on. So now it's going to ask regarding payment for utensils. This is the new part. Or for an ox that is a disqualified offering, when one of these objects is pushed in the pit. Again, utensils, an ox that is a disqualified offering. The person in the ox is liable, whereas the pit is exempt. Okay? So let's just discuss the reason. A pit is never liable for damage to utensils, as taught in the Mishnah in 52a, and derived from scripture at the end of the Muad. It's also exempt when the damaged object is a consecrated animal, even if it was disqualified by blemish and redeemed. Okay? So the person and the ox, however, are liable for the breakage of utensils. As for the disqualified offering, we're dealing with one that has been redeemed, so it's considered as fellow's ox, for which damages are payable by the person and the ox. Because you might have wondered, we've learned before that if it's a consecrated ox, in certain cases, it's not the ox of your fellow. And we learned cases before where if the temple consecrated ox damages you, it's not liable to pay you. But if you damage it, you're liable to pay it. And there's another opinion that it's not liable to pay you and you're not liable to pay it. So this is obviously going to the opinion where it was consecrated and it's now been redeemed. But either way, the bottom line is we learn that the pit is exempt for utensils as well as an ox that is a disqualified offering, which means it's probably been redeemed. But a human being and the ox are liable for damage to utensils. All right, let's move on. 53b3. So Rava clarifies the source of the rule that a boar is exempt when a disqualified offering falls into it. What's the reason? Okay, so it's the first time we're learning about a disqualified offering with regards to non-liability if it fell in the pit. Scripture states about an animal that dies in a pit, for which the pit's owner must make restitution, and the carcass shall be his. Okay, that's in Shmot chapter 21, verse 34. And what does it imply, that, guys? It implies that we're dealing with the one about whom it can say that the carcass is his own property. If I say the carcass shall be his, is it whose? Is it the damager? Or is it the damaged party? Remember, we did this in 10b. I'm going to go through this if I don't have time today, another time. But we already discussed where the verse has used three sources to show that it's the damaged parties. And it's not the damagers. 3 verses in 10b, okay? So basically the argument is, if the carcass is the damaged party, is he allowed to be compensated for the disqualified offering, since the carcass is not to be used as he pleases? So what do we mean by that? Is that if it's an ordinary ox, we learned that what happens is if it falls in the pit, the damaged party has to recover the ox, and the owner of the pit only has to make the financial restitution between what it was worth alive and what the carcass is worth in its present state. And we learned as far as deterioration is concerned, you don't pay for that sort of carcass, what do you call it, when it starts to decompose. Yeah, I think that's the right word, exactly. When it starts to decompose. So the damaged party has to get it out there in a hurry because he takes the loss. So obviously the person, and it's the same thing when you're sure, attacks another animal. The carcass we learned is who's the damaged party, and the person has to make the difference between what the live ox is worth and the carcass is worth. Same with the boar. Okay? So what we're saying here is, well, what actually happens? How come you can't use the carcass and recover your money as far as that's concerned? Because excluded from compensation, therefore, is this one, the owner of a disqualified offering, since the carcass is not his to do as he pleases. So there's a verse in Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 15, okay? And it basically states regarding formerly consecrated animals, you shall slaughter and eat their meat. And if it has to say that, it implies that's the only thing you can do with it. Okay, so in other words, if the offering was disqualified and it was redeemed, and then you're entitled to use it if it's redeemed. If it's not, you can't. But if it died without being slaughtered, you can't eat it. And the only thing you can do with a redeemed carcass, with a redeemed animal, is eat it. You can't sell it. You can't use it as a working animal. So if it died without shchita, the carcass must be buried. It's the only thing you can do with it. Does that make sense, guys? So if you can't use it for sharing, milking, feeding the meat to the dogs, etc., those are the examples used in Gemara Bechoros in 15b. So if an animal fell in a pit and died, that is unfit to be eaten because it is a nevela. What's a nevela, Kevin? An animal that has not been?
It has to be properly slaughtered.
Exactly. It must be buried. So we can't fulfill the verse, the carcass shall be his. The owner now is not entitled to compensation. Now the question is, what happens? Does the person then, given the difference between the live animal and the dead animal? No. The reason being is because the only thing he could have done with the animal was eaten it. That's all. So what are you going to give him money for? For what? You get what I'm saying? So basically, we don't understand why Rabbi is asking such a question, because it says, do you mean to say that it's obvious to Rabbi that when a disqualified offering is killed in a pit, its owner does not receive compensation? But Rabbi actually inquired about this law, indicating that he was undecided. For Rabbi inquired, if an ox that is a disqualified offering falls into a pit, what is the law? Do we say that this verse, and the carcass shall be his, means to teach that we're dealing with one about whom it can be said that the carcass is his? But in fact, it's still excluded from compensation, because he can't do with the carcass as he pleases. Or maybe we say the verse in the carcass shall be his comes to teach that the owner of the damaged ox must deal with the carcass, and it doesn't come to exclude him from compensation for a disqualified offering. Since Rabbi was undecided about the law, how can he state unequivocally that a boar does not include liability for a disqualified offering? So the Gemara responds, yes. After Rabbi inquired, at that point he was undecided, he resolved the inquiry. At the point where he resolved the inquiry, he then was sure about it after investigation, because the verse comes to exclude the owner of a disqualified offering from compensation when it's damaged by a boar. Okay? So the Gemara asks then, where does Rabbi derive the rule that the owner of the damaged ox must deal with the carcass? Okay? So I've got 10b, which I'm going to discuss with you. I just want to go through the concept before I go through 10b, just to cover a little bit of ground. If we've got time, I'll go through 10b with you. So the Gemara answers, he derives it from the verse, and the carcass shall be his. It's written regarding damage by shore of an ox. So where's that? Guys, in Exodus chapter 21, verse 36, it's stated that when a muad ox gores its fellow, he shall surely pay the value of an ox in place of the dead ox, and the carcass shall be his. Okay? So if I say to you, listen, my ox killed your ox, and I just replace the value, what do you need to say and the carcass will be his for? Does that make sense? So you could turn around and say to me, well, maybe the carcass, if you're paying for the full value of the animal, the damaged party is not entitled to profit. So therefore, he can't score the value of the animal and keep the carcass that's worth money. So maybe the damager keeps the carcass. Maybe you could have thought that. So it's not an unreasonable assumption. Okay, but the grammatical outlay of the statement, stating that first, the ox shall be placed in the place of the dead ox and the carcass shall be his, teaches that the damaged party must deal with the carcass. Okay, now in terms of where exactly, I have no idea, because you could actually infer the other way around, as long as the damaged party didn't profit. But I'll show you in 10b where it is. So we learn that the law applies in all cases of damage. What does it mean? Because it was the same thing when we discussed a boar on a shore. If an animal fell in, the carcass shall be his. Are you with me? So I'm going to read the verses. So in other words, the thematic fact that the damaged party keeps the carcass is mentioned 3 times, and it constitutes in any of the damages with regards to an ox. Okay, whether a person kills an ox, whether an ox kills an ox, or it's a pit or any other hazard. Okay, let me just give you a bottom line here. So the Gemara is basically wondering that if he derives the verse and the carcass shall be his regarding Bara Shore, the Gemara wonders why you're applying it in that order, because it says, why do you see fit to apply the verse and the carcass shall be his of the passage of Shore to the law that the owner of the damaged ox must deal with the carcass, and apply to the verse and the carcass shall be his of the passage of Bor to the law that only about whom it can be said that the carcass is his is entitled to compensation, thus excluding the owner of a disqualified offering from compensation in the damage of a boar. I can reverse these expositions. Let me expound the boar verse as teaching the damaged party must deal with the carcass, and the shore verse is excluding the owner of a disqualified offering from compensation, and let me thus hold the boar liable for damage for a disqualified offering. So let me just give you the quick version of what this is saying. Now, all Rashi brings as a point is that basically we want to know the rule. We know the rule that whether it's a shore or a boar is that it's the damaged party's headache to deal with the carcass, and the damager only has to pay. The damager only has to pay the difference between the live and the dead animal, right? But what it's saying is, as far as the disqualification of a disqualified offering, in other words, you don't get paid for it. Why does that apply to a boar and not a shore? You could say, I've got an ox and it gores another ox that was a disqualified offering. Now, why should I be compensated? Because that wasn't shechted in the right way, and the only thing I can do with that animal is eat it. So the Gemara is asking, well, why do we apply that to the case of boar and not a case of shore? You could equally apply to shore. That's all it's saying. Why apply to boar and not shore? That's the only thing it's saying. Do you understand what I'm saying, guys, in terms of exemption?
Also.
Sorry, Gav?
Is there an answer to that?
Yeah. So this is the answer. So it's saying, at the end of the day, the Gemara says, is it reasonable to apply the exemption to the case of a boar? since a bor is subject to another leniency, inasmuch as Scripture exempted it from payment for damage to utensils. Okay? So even according to Rav Yehuda, if you want to say that holds you liable for utensils for damage in a pit, he still says that you exempt the payment in the event of a person's death. So in other words, what it's saying here is we have this complete exemption in the case of a bor. You don't have that in a shor, either for utensils and death of a person or just for death of a person according to Rabbi Yehuda, but there's still a proper exemption either way. Whereas shor, you don't have an exemption. And then the Gemara argues and says, no, but there is a leniency with regards to shor. What is it? Is that you can actually have it exempted to paying half damages when it's tam. So it's saying, hang on, I've got a counter argument. There's leniencies with shor as well. There's half payments for tam. So why are you making it a bor? And the Gemara responds, at any rate, we do not ever find an exemption from the entire damage in the case of a shor. Since a bor is entirely exempt from paying for damages to utensils, reason dictates that it's also one that it is exempt from paying damage to a disqualified offering. So what it's saying is you cannot compare a leniency to a complete exemption. And you don't have a complete exemption with regards to shor, but you do as far as a bor is concerned.
I think that just the way maybe like why Hashem came up with that is, I'm just guessing, but this, in my opinion, humble opinion as well, is that when a man walks and he walks into a pit, he's just an idiot, but when a shor hits him, it's not really necessarily his fault, it's difficult. So that's why he's compensated. You understand what I'm saying?
No. Listen, no, Gav. He's compensated even if he falls in and is injured, but not for death.
Yeah, I'm talking about for death.
Yes, because you're not negligent to the same degree. It's not an actively moving hazard like a shor that's been warned and is crazy. A person can't evade it. As you said, if he fell in and died, he's an idiot.
Yes,
and I don't want to say he's an idiot because next thing I'll fall in a pothole. So let me not say that. Anyway, listen, it's a biblical verse either way. So I just want to finish this particular page, then tell you 10b, and then we can do it in time. Okay? So quickly, and I'll repeat this on Saturday night, but I want to finish the daf. So we've got a few lines left. The Mishnah states, if an ox with its utensils fell into a pit and the utensils broke, the owner of the pit is liable to pay for damage to the animal, but is exempt from paying for damage to the utensils. The Gemara comments, our Mishnah is not in accordance with the opinion of Rav Yehuda, for it was taught in a brisa. Rav Yehuda holds the owner liable for damage done to utensils in a pit. The Mishnah, however, reflects the opinion of the Tanaim who oppose this view. The Gemara seeks a scriptural source for each opinion. What is the rabbi's reason for exempting the owner of a bor from paying for damage to utensils? Scripture states, if one shall dig a pit and an ox or donkey shall fall into it, etc. Since the verse specifies an ox or a donkey, this implies he's liable for an ox, but not for a person, for a donkey, but not for utensils. Thus, one is liable if an animal falls into his pit and dies, but not if a person falls in and dies, or if utensils fall in and break. But Rav Yehuda maintains that the word or, as in an ox or a donkey, comes to include utensils for compensation, because the Torah could have written Gashor v'chamor, the word and, okay, but it didn't. It wrote the word or. So it comes to include utensils for compensation. The rabbis don't read it like that. The rabbis, however, maintain that. Just want to finish the sentence. The word or is needed to separate an ox from a donkey and to teach that liability is incurred even if one of them falls in the pit. In other words, you might have thought that if it used the word and, both had to fall in the pit. So it says it uses that or to show that either fell in the pit. So it's not available to include utensils for compensation. It's not an open Gezerah Shabbat. But Rav Yehuda maintains that separating an ox from a donkey is derived from the expression and shall fall, which is the singular form and implies that the owner is liable only if one animal falls in. So, guys, there are examples of that. I'll give you an example, right? There's a case where it talks about in Exodus chapter 36, verse 1, it uses singulars referring to Batitzel and Ahaliav. And it uses a term like a singular, even though it's talking about two men, right? And then there's another case in Deuteronomy chapter 13, verse 3, which uses the singular, and it uses the term, and signs and wonders come about. You know, when it says the Jews were rescued from Egypt and there were signs and wonders, but it uses the singular, even though it's speaking about two things. And it also states in the first book of Samuel, chapter 17, verse 34, the lion and the bear came. It uses the singular. So what Rav Yehuda is saying is that you don't actually need that open Gezerah Shava, because there are cases where it mentions two animals, but it can refer to the singular as well. So the word is free to show that there are certain cases in terms of liability for utensils. Does that make sense? But the rabbis don't hold like that. They say that you need the word, because the word and shall fall may imply that even many animals will fall in. So the Torah needed to write the word or to separate an ox from a donkey, and this word may not be expounded as coming to include utensils. So that's where they have that particular argument. So we finished that daf. I just wanted to bring one or two issues quickly for 10 minutes on 10b. Okay? It's the first book. So we were learning okay, let me just okay. So basically we were learning, the Gemara analyzes the Mishnah statement, and it says the Mishnah does not say I'm liable for his damage. Okay? Because if you say you're liable for the damage, it means that the damager must replace the injured party's dead animal with a living one of like kind, or the monetary equivalent, and would therefore retain the carcass himself. It doesn't use that wording. It doesn't say I'm liable for his damage. It states I'm obligated in the payment of his damage. So the word tashluma, the word tashlumay and tashluma is the same. So in other words, tashlumay means payment and tashluma means completion. So what did we learn from there? That basically you only have to complete the payment. You don't have to actually take the carcass onto yourself as a damager and then pay the full amount. All you have to do is complete the payment. Does that make sense? So that's your first proof that the carcass belongs to the damaged party. Okay? And that's why if you have an act of damage, you can also pay if you don't have monetary equivalent with barley or wheat, etc. We learned that. So that's obviously part of it. So we stated in the Mishnah what the rabbis taught in a brisa, payment of the damage, which teaches that the owner, the injured party, must deal with the carcass. Okay? So let me just give you another source. Give me one sec. So there's a source from Rav Ami, one who strikes an animal mortally shall pay for it. Now, what are we talking about when a human being hits an animal for some unknown reason and kills it? So it says you must not read shall pay for it. You shall mena, but you shall make completion. Yash li mena. So all it is, it's exactly the same Hebrew letters. The only thing is the vowel is there. So we learn a separate reason. We learned this when an ox attacks an ox. Now we're learning it when a person attacks an ox. Okay? Then there's a third source, Rav Kahala, who said, if it shall be torn to death, he shall produce a witness for a torn animal he does not pay. He shall pay for all the damage up until the value of the torn animal's carcass. However, it does not pay for the torn animal itself. Rather, it's the owner's responsibility to sell the carcass to recoup that portion of his loss. Chizkiah said the owner's burden with selling the carcass is derived from here, and the carcass shall be his. That is the damaged parties. And how do we know that it belongs to the damaged parties? Or do you say that the carcass falls to the damaged party, or is it not rather that it falls to the damager? To this, you should say it shall not be this way. What does it mean? A buyer said, if it enters your mind to say that the carcass belongs to the damager, let the merciful one in his Torah write only the phrase, he shall surely pay an ox in the place of an ox and be silent. It doesn't have to say the carcass shall be his. That's all you have to say. That's your biggest proof. Okay, so it's given 3 different proofs here, guys. Derived from this that the carcass belongs to the damaged party, so that the damager need only complete the other's indemnification. Okay, so it talks about this, and it brings examples of the pit. I'm not going to give you all the other details. You can go back to the previous shiurim. But we learn about the depreciation, and what about the cost of bringing it out the pit? Do you remember that? And the what did you say when it starts to go off the body, Kev?
Decompose,
yeah.